Okay, so welcome to part 3 of the engine. Now, you can see there has been change here, and that's mainly that, obviously, I've done some painting. Now, I haven't shown all of this because I think you've seen people paint before, right? And hand painting does take quite a lot of time, and, it's not that interesting. So, I will show you what I've used on this so far, and also, I'm going to spray some parts today, and I'll show you that. So, first of all, I think it looks pretty good so far as a little unit. Now, what I did with this is I sprayed this with Autotac matte black spray paint. So I use this for priming pretty much everything armor-wise and anything that's going to be black. I use this stuff. People always talk about, if it's not specifically made for model, that's garbage. I swear by this stuff. It's very thin, it conforms, it shows all the detail, it binds to the plastic because it's a solvent-based spray, as most sprays are. You can get aqueous acrylic ones, but they're not as good. This binds to the plastic, and that's what you want for a primer, right? So I use that stuff. In terms of then where I picked out the detail here, the kind of steel and gunmetal, I've just used one colour. So I've used this ICM 1026 oily steel. I think that gives pretty good coverage. I do thin it with my proprietary deionized water alcohol mix. It's about 20% alcohol, so you end up with about 5 to 10% alcohol in the final mix, which just takes the surface tension off a little bit. It doesn't precipitate anything out. It's quite gentle. Ethanol itself is quite nice. It's got good solvating properties, and it's quite gentle. IPA is a little bit more harsh. You're more likely to push things out of solution and get issues with isopropanol. Although isopropanol, again, is a very good solvent. Now, there are a couple of areas where I've got some colour here. So the blue for the supercharger is just 1077 dark blue. You have these pipes at the front. Now, it doesn't tell you to do this in the instructions, but I've looked at some DB605 reference images, and that is just rusty brass and copper. So copper for the bendy bits of the pipe, rusty brass for the attachment parts. So you can go overboard with these and really, super paint them. I'm not particularly going to do that. I want the impression. I'm going to weather this all as well. You notice I've just got oily steel for the exhausts, but I am going to weather those to make them look rusty as they appeared on the actual aircraft. So that's that part. Then I've also got a number of parts that I've sprayed slightly separately, and this is using aluminium. Now, this is a paint that I got in substitute for the Autotac aluminium, which I prefer. This is okay. It's not my preferred one, but it just goes to show that you don't have to be absolutely exacting about these things. So I did fill the seam. Just did the seam here. It's not absolutely perfect, but I don't want to spend forever doing this. I just want to show you guys out of the box build with basic stuff done. I'm not going to go overboard on any of this. But this is the front oil tank. So I've seen them in RLMO2, I've seen them in silver. I'm going to leave mine as silver because I think it provides a nice contrast with the rest of the engine. Looks pretty good. And, end of the war, getting towards the end of the war, they weren't priming everything. We've got the actual engine bearers themselves, which again, I've just sprayed aluminium. These are going to be sprayed RLMO2, but I want to do them aluminium to give some chipping effects on those. And then I've got these 2 coolant tanks. Likewise, these could be RLMO2 or silver. They did need a little bit of work on the seams. So I've done a little bit of work on the seams. Again, they're not 100% perfect, but they are good enough for this. We've got this cable bundle. Again, I sprayed this silver, then picked out the cables in, this time, rubber black. Just to give a little bit of a difference in contrast. Might not notice it too much. But again, the weathering will pick out some more of this. These also will be matte. I will spray this because these engines were finished with a gloss paint. So we will actually create that effect in a second. I've also got all of the other cables, or cables, pipes I should say, pipelines, all picked out with black for the flexible attachment pieces. Again, these are just done in that aluminium rattle can spray. Same for these pieces, aluminium rattle can spray, and then again this is that 1077 dark blue for the supercharger attachment piece. Now, somebody asked in the comments of the last video, which is a sensible question to ask, or actually I think they did it in the, maybe in the first video, in one of them anyway, why don't I paint on the sprue? Now, perfectly valid question. It's perfectly valid to paint everything. I think Nigel paints everything like on the frames before actually putting things together. This is purely down to personal preference. There is no correct way to do it. So, for instance, somebody was saying, oh, it'd be far easier to paint this on the frame than to do it on the engine. It's like, well, actually, this was not difficult to paint. You know, I'm not doing the undersides of it, but see the undersides anyway. Just picking out this top piece, it is, you know, it's very easy. You know, you don't need a particularly steady hand to make that work. So there are pieces here picked out in oily steel. I think oily steel is a good compromise because I don't think you really ever get really shiny bits on an engine in use. It might have been shiny to start with. It won't be after the engine's been running for a few hours. And yes, they were maintained, but they weren't polishing these things. They were making them work, not making them, you know, like an American hot rod. So there are pieces here to pick out in RLMO2. So where the attachment parts go, actually these were all the engine formers. These pieces, these plates, are actually part of those formers and then bolted onto the engine. And the bolts are very nicely recreated, but obviously we're going to paint those on there. I'm going to be mixing up an RLMO2 with ICM paints. And one of the reasons that I'm going to do that is that I can spray it over these primed parts. ICM paints spray really well on primed parts. I wouldn't use them for bare plastic. They spray really well on primed parts, and I can then use exactly the same paint to actually pick out these in hand painting. So for me, that's an ideal solution. It gets the best of both worlds. So that is the engine so far. I also sprayed the undersides of these in matte black because they're just going to, which way do they fit this way around? They're going to sit on here. They actually go into this little former here. And then the insides are black. So I just pre-sprayed those pieces. So all of that aside, the next piece I'm going to do is actually this. So this is the firewall that this attaches to, or at least part of it, and then you've got a piece that actually comes from the main fuselage, comes through this hole, and then goes into the engine here. But of course, this is mainly RLMO2 with bits picked out in various different shades, black and silver mainly. So I'm going to put this together before I then spray everything, because I want to spray this aluminium, I want to get a coat of chipping fluid down on it, and then I'm going to put that together. So that's where I'm going to start today, and we'll see how far I get. So this is what I was just talking about. Here is basically it's the firewall for the engine and mounting pieces. So that's what I'm going to be building up. And basically it's steps 177 through to 179. Obviously I'm not going to put it onto the aircraft body because I haven't built that yet. But I want to get this built and then painted up at the same time as doing the other engine components. Makes sense to me at least. So let's get on with it. Just make sure we get all of the sprue gates cleaned up here. These pieces have little tabs on the bottom here. We just put them in the right place. Allows you to pop them in. Some extra thin. get all of those joints. Airfix plastic is pretty receptive to liquid cement as well, which is a good thing. Tack-on plastic can be quite resistant. Some of the Chinese plastics do tend to be a little bit harder, like Hasegawa plastic as well, but that's quite receptive to cement. It's just very hard. So that forms the kind of main structure here. So this is the top where you've got the 4 holes. The next part is you're bringing on this former, I want to say. No. So this piece with the slots in is the top, because you're bringing in this former. It's got 2 little tabs that just go in there again. Really nice and easy, really easy to just get in our cement. Got some nice detail pieces here that's going to pick out washes and stuff quite well. And then this piece at the bottom, you've got 4 little pins which just go onto the holes, which takes a little bit of fiddling. You've got to make sure you get it underneath this little actuator, otherwise it doesn't want to fit. Quite liberal. Back here, because of course you're not going to see any of that. Here you see you've got the attachment points where the machine guns rest on. You've got your mounting points for them here. Sits on. So see if we've got to trim down those little pieces there. We won't be able to see them, but you know, just in case. So overall, nice little sub-assembly. Obviously the engine is going to sit these 2 pieces go together like that. I think getting it done at this time is definitely to go. So the way I usually deal with sub-assemblies like this is I'll get one of these little crocodile clips, hold it, and then I'm just going to use the brown can, spray that up. So there it is sprayed. You can see it looks quite a thick layer that I've put on. It's not particularly, and that solvent will all evaporate away. Okay, so I'm just using Vallejo chipping medium. Just going to smooth that with my airbrush. Clean a little bit. My deionized water ethanol mix. I like using water ethanol because it's such a universal sort of solvent mixture for aqueous acrylic mixes. One thing it does need though is a lot higher pressure on the airbrush than I would use for normal paint. It is quite thick. coat of it. I'm only putting it where it's needed, obviously. You get a little bit of overspray, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, I'm mainly putting it where I need it because, I mean, on the backs here, there's no real point because I'm not going to be chipping those anyway. I've gone pretty thick with it because obviously I have diluted it and I want to make sure that I do actually get enough to work, because if you dilute it too much, obviously you're not going to get the effect. And then you really need to clean your airbrush out afterwards. So one thing I use a lot of are these pointed cotton buds. You call them Q-tips in America. In terms of being able to get out a lot of crap from your airbrush, they are great. What I'll also do after I clean my airbrush out like this is I'm just going to fill this cup up. I'm going to blast some of that through. And just leave that sitting in there. So this stuff doesn't take that long to dry, which is pretty good. But it does need to be dry before you get on to the next piece. So we'll come back in a little bit when that's done. Okay, so whilst that's waiting to dry, I'm actually going to make up the RLMO2. I'm actually mixing up a 1/24th scale, so I've accounted for some scale effect in here. So I'm using a 1:1:1 mixture of 1033, 1035, 1056 from ICM. So this should produce a nice light RLMO2, because of course it will get weathered after that, so I don't want to produce something that's too dark. I'm going to go ahead and mix these together. So I'm just using these little, these are actually T2 ink cups, which are quite a nice little handy size for doing this. And it means you're not mixing in your airbrush cup, which I've done in the past. Is not ideal. Especially when you spill. Doing this on my desk, not easy to remedy. I was in the airbrush cup. I'm using about half a mil, I think. I think that's what this, maybe a third of a mil. I'm not exactly sure. The actual volume isn't that important. What's important is an equal volume of each. RMO2 is an unusual colour, sort of this grey-green, but it does have this brown tone to it. This is probably the minimum volume of paint I would ever mix to go in an airbrush. I generally use a slightly larger cup, but we're not going to be doing very much, so for this it's absolutely fine. And of course, what I want to do, put the cap on that, like that. This will do. This is it. As you can see, the consistency of this is quite thin, which is what I'm looking for. And then here, I'm just going to paint too much paint on that, really. Paint these brackets up too. Just like that. So, am I being super careful? I mean, I'm being careful, right? But am I being anal about it? Not particularly, and that's mainly because this is going to get weathered. It's also going to have a second coat. So yeah, I'm not too concerned. I mean, as long as I'm not sloppy, it should be good. Now, normally I wouldn't be painting an engine like this black. You know, I've discussed before about how black doesn't really appear black. In scale, and if you go for black, you've got no sort of ceiling, but in terms of putting on the floor, your floor is too low chromatically to be able to really contrast with it, but I'm going against my normal rule here in terms of convenience. so there's that. Now the other thing I'm going to do, I mentioned I was going to clear coat this, and that's something I'm going to do now. Once this coat is dried, and I'm going to come over this with the coat of the O2 afterwards to mat it down. Okay, so let's bring in the RMO2 from our little cup. So we've got a decent amount there. Give that a bit of a mix. Just the pressure because it was a little bit high from spraying the chipping medium. And then we're going to go back and pretty easy. So this is one of the reasons that I like putting all of these kind of cables and pipes on in this sort of thing all at the same time, because you never know what's going to affect another part of it and make it pop off or it really is not sticking. massive. So I don't know if you could see that when I was rubbing the brush, it was actually taking the paint off underneath. Come back in a little minute when this is set.